The oppressive summer sun beat down on the Aqua Doom water park, baking the plastic slides until they shimmered like mirages. A group of teenagers, high on the thrill of a day off school, scrambled to the top of the aptly named Vortex, a monstrous tube of twisting, turning dark fiberglass. Who's first? Jake shouted, his voice cracking with preteen excitement. Lewis, ever the daredevil, didn't even wait for an answer. With a whoop, he launched himself into the inky blackness. The others cheered, their laughter echoing off the damp, enclosed space. A moment later, a blood-curdling scream ripped through the air, quickly swallowed by the roaring rush of water. Wow, Lewis is really getting into it, Emma giggled, mistaking the shriek for pure exhilaration. My turn! She cannonballed into the darkness, followed closely by Chloe, then Sam, each one eager to experience the fun Louis was clearly having. But Louis wasn't having fun. Not anymore. As he hurtled down the vortex, the initial rush gave way to a chilling realization. The darkness wasn't just the inside of a slide, it was a blind descent, and the roaring water was punctuated by a sickening scraping sound. He felt a sharp, burning pain rip across his side, then his leg, as if he'd been dragged over a cheese grater. He tried to scream again, but the water filled his mouth, choking him. The current twisted him, spun him, and for a terrifying second, he was facing backward, looking up the slide. That's when he saw it. In the faint, almost non-existent light filtering from the entrance, he saw a jagged, gaping crack in the fiberglass, running like a lightning bolt across the inner surface of the slide. The edges were razor sharp, glinting wickedly even in the dimness. As he watched, horrified, he saw what looked like streaks of dark red smeared along the fractured plastic. The screams he'd heard were his own, of course, but the others had mistaken them for joy. He hit the splash pool with a violent force, gasping for air, scrambling out, his eyes wide with a terror that no summer day should ever hold. The lifeguard, idly flipping through a magazine, barely registered his emergence. Louis spun around, yelling, "Don't go! Don't go! There's a crack in the slide!" But it was too late. Emma had already emerged, her face pale, her swimsuit torn in several places, and a crimson stain rapidly blooming on her thigh. She didn't scream, she didn't cry. She just stared blankly at Louis, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor running through her. And then, from the depths of the splash pool, Chloe surfaced, her head lolling unnaturally, her bright yellow swimsuit shredded, revealing horrifying gashes. Sam shot out next, his body unnaturally still, the water around him immediately clouding with red. The sun still shone, the music still blared, but a chill had descended upon the Aqua Doom, a chill that had nothing to do with the cool water. The screams of joy had been a lie, and the true horror of the neglected maintenance had just surfaced. The lifeguard finally looked up, alerted by the sudden quiet. He saw Louis, soaking wet and shaking, pointing a trembling finger back at the slide's exit. He saw Emma, bleeding and in shock. And then he saw Chloe and Sam, undeniably lifeless, floating in the shallow splash pool. The bright, cheerful atmosphere of the water park curdled, revealing the horrific consequences of ignored safety warnings and worn-out equipment. The Aqua Doom was not just a water park, it was a death trap. And the vortex, with its hidden, razor-sharp maw, had claimed its first victims. Part 2. The cover-up begins. The lifeguard, a young man named Gary, felt a cold dread creep through him, replacing his usual summer boredom. The scene before him was a nightmare. Lewis's frantic shouts, Emma's bleeding leg, and the sickening stillness of Chloe and Sam in the water. His eyes darted to the mouth of the vortex, where he could just make out the glint of the fractured fiberglass. This wasn't a minor accident. This was a catastrophe. His first instinct was to call 911, but before he could even reach for his radio, A shrill whistle cut through the air. Mr. Hernandez, the park manager, a portly man with a perpetually furrowed brow, was striding towards them, his face a mask of controlled fury. He took in the scene with a single, sweeping glance, his eyes lingering on the bodies in the pool for only a second too long. What in God's name is going on here? Hernandez's voice was low but laced with menace. He didn't wait for an answer. Gary, get those children out of the water. Immediately. And you, he pointed at Lewis, his finger trembling slightly, control yourself. There's no need for hysterics. Gary, still reeling, moved on autopilot, wading into the pool. The water, now murky with blood, swirled around his knees. He gently lifted Chloe, her body disturbingly light, her limbs chillingly limp. As he carried her towards the side, Hernandez was already barking orders into his phone, his back to the scene. Security to the Vortex, code red, and get the medical team quietly. Within minutes, two burly security guards in crisp white shirts were at the scene, their faces grim. They moved with practiced efficiency, erecting temporary barriers around the splash pool, subtly blocking the view of curious park-goers. One guard spoke in hushed tones to Emma, guiding her away from the edge, while the other began ushering bewildered families further down the path. Hernandez was a whirlwind of hushed commands. No one leaves this area until we've assessed the situation. This is a temporary closure for maintenance. We apologize for the inconvenience. The words were designed to sound reassuring, but they hung in the humid air like a shroud. He then turned his full attention to Lewis, who was still trying to explain what he saw. Mr. Hernandez, there's a huge crack in the slide. It's like razor blades in there, Louis pleaded, gesturing wildly towards the vortex. Hernandez's eyes narrowed. He placed a firm, almost crushing hand on Louis's shoulder. Son, I understand you're upset, but you're clearly disoriented. There are no cracks in our slides. This was an unfortunate incident, a medical emergency. Do you understand? His voice was low, persuasive, and utterly chilling. Louis felt the knot of fear tighten in his stomach. He looked at Gary, who avoided his gaze, then at the impassive faces of the security guards. He realized, with a sickening certainty, that no one was going to believe him. The Aqua Doom wasn't just covering up an accident. They were erasing it. The screams of joy had been a lie, and the deadly truth was now being buried under a mountain of corporate lies. Part 3. The Unfolding Cover-Up. The next few hours at Aqua Doom were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Mr. Hernandez, a man clearly experienced in crisis management, orchestrated a chillingly efficient operation. The temporary maintenance closure of the vortex was announced over the loudspeakers, a chipper, pre-recorded message belying the grim reality at the top of the slide. Security guards, now joined by plainclothes staff members, subtly but firmly redirected anyone who lingered near the splash pool. Families, sensing a shift in the park's vibrant energy, began to pack up, grumbling about wasted tickets but ultimately eager to escape the suddenly oppressive atmosphere. Louis, still soaked and shivering with shock, found himself ushered into a small, windowless office by two silent security guards. Hernandez entered moments later, his face now a mask of practiced concern. Louis, we're very sorry for the distress you've experienced, he began, his voice smooth as silk. We understand this was a frightening incident. We've arranged for your parents to be contacted and will ensure you get home safely. Before Louis could protest or reiterate his claims about the crack, a park medic, looking distinctly uncomfortable, entered with a small bag. Just a mild sedative to help you calm down, son, Hernandez explained, though it felt more like a command. Louis resisted, but the medic was surprisingly strong, and soon a dull haze began to settle over his frantic thoughts. He vaguely heard Hernandez explaining away his earlier shouts as post-traumatic stress and hallucinations due to shock. Meanwhile, outside, the true horror was being meticulously erased. Chloe and Sam's bodies, wrapped in dark tarpaulins, were discreetly loaded into a plain white van, not an ambulance. Hernandez made a quick, hushed call, presumably to the local coroner or a sympathetic contact, arranging for the deaths to be classified as drowning accidents during a spontaneous seizure event. Emma, still dazed and bleeding, was taken to the park's first aid station, where her lacerations were cleaned and bandaged with alarming speed. A park employee, posing as a sympathetic counselor, gently but firmly guided her through a fabricated story about slipping on the wet surface near the splash pool and hitting her head, causing the injuries. The park's maintenance crew, under intense supervision from Hernandez himself, descended on the vortex. Special chemicals were sprayed into the slide, not to clean, but to obscure any remaining bloodstains. The jagged crack, the silent witness to the tragedy, was quickly repaired with a fiberglass patching kit. The work was crude, but effective enough to withstand a cursory glance. By the time the last of the families had left, and the sun began to dip below the horizon, the Aqua Doom appeared, to the untrained eye, to be just another water park after a busy day. The only lingering signs were the faint smell of chemicals and the unnatural quiet around the vortex, now cordoned off with a permanent-looking, closed for seasonal maintenance sign. The official story, meticulously crafted and rehearsed, was ready for any inquiries. 2 unfortunate drownings, a minor injury due to a fall, and a distressed teenager's overactive imagination. The Aqua Doom's reputation, and more importantly, its financial stability, would remain unblemished. The only price, it seemed, was the truth and the lives of 2 teenagers. The evening rush hour MTR was a familiar symphony of tired sighs and hushed conversations as 26-year-old Leeway made her way home from her marketing job in the Central. Usually, she buried her nose in a book, but tonight, a signal fault had everyone restless. That's when he appeared, settling into the seat beside her. A man in his late 50s, neatly dressed, with kind eyes and a briefcase resting on his lap. Terrible delay, isn't it? He offered with a warm smile. Li Wei, usually reserved, found herself returning it. They struck up a conversation, meandering through topics like the unpredictable summer humidity and the best dim sum spots in Mongkok. His name was Mr. Chen, he said, and he was a retired accountant visiting from the mainland. As the MTR pulled into Li Wei's stop, Mr. Chen sighed, a genuine note of frustration in his voice. This is a bit of a pickle, he mused, gesturing to the briefcase. I was on my way to deliver this letter to an old friend, a rather important document, but something unexpected just came up. A family emergency, you see? He looked at Li Wei, a hopeful glint in his eye. I know this is a strange request, and please feel free to decline, but the address is just a few stops from here, not far from where you're getting off. Would you consider doing me a tremendous favor? I'd be more than happy to compensate you for your trouble. He pulled out a crisp $500 note. Li Wei hesitated. $500 for a quick detour? The address on the envelope did indeed seem to be in her general direction, in a less familiar part of Kowloon. It felt a little odd, but Mr. Chen seemed genuinely distressed, and the money was certainly tempting for a young professional trying to save. Okay, she found herself saying, I can do that for you. She took the money and the neatly sealed envelope, feeling a small thrill of helpfulness. Mr. Chen thanked her profusely, a relieved smile spreading across his face as he hurried off the train. Li Wei didn't think to ask for his number. It was just a quick favor, after all. Back on the street, armed with her phone's GPS, Li Wei began her search for the address. The initial streets were familiar, bustling with the usual evening crowds and neon signs. But as she delved deeper, The surroundings grew increasingly unfamiliar. The charming, lively residential areas gave way to narrower, poorly lit lanes. The GPS led her down what felt like a forgotten path, eventually dead-ending into a short, isolated alleyway lined with a handful of small, dilapidated buildings. Their windows were boarded up, paint peeling, and a thick layer of dust coated everything. A few for lease signs were barely visible, faded and torn. It was strangely quiet, and the air felt heavy with the scent of damp concrete and neglect. This can't be right, Leeway muttered to herself, a prickle of unease starting to crawl up her spine. The address, 17B, wasn't visible anywhere. As twilight deepened and the distant city lights blurred, casting long, distorted shadows, the desolate atmosphere became unsettling. Giving up for the night, a faint sense of disappointment and a growing unease settling in, Leeway decided to call it quits and headed home. At her small apartment, Leeway tossed her keys and the mysterious envelope onto the entryway table. Her energetic Jack Russell, Bow Bow, greeted her with an excited flurry of tail wags and happy yips. As Li Wei headed to the kitchen to start dinner, Bao Bao, ever the mischievous one, seized his opportunity. He loved to help with the mail, often snatching newspapers and stashing them in his outdoor kennel on the small balcony. Tonight, the envelope met the same fate, disappearing silently into Bao Bao's den. Li Wei, none the wiser, enjoyed a quick dinner, took a relaxing bath, and was soon fast asleep, the day's strange encounter already fading into the background of her dreams. The next morning, the missing envelope was the least of her worries. A frantic search for her work ID, followed by a mad dash to catch her MTR, meant the letter was quickly forgotten. She felt a twinge of guilt about Mr. Chen's important document, but without his contact information, there was nothing she could do. It was the following Saturday, a day dedicated to deep cleaning. Li Wei was tackling Bao Bao's kennel, a weekly ritual that usually unearthed an assortment of chew toys and buried bones. Tucked away in a dusty corner, beneath a tattered blanket, she found it, the envelope. It was torn in several places, a testament to Bao Bao's playful handling and slightly damp from the morning dew, but still mostly intact. Bao Bao, you rascal! She chuckled, retrieving it. Curiously, she pulled out the contents. The paper was creased and slightly shredded, but the message was short and clear, scrawled in neat, dark ink. Here's another one. Li Wei frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion. Here's another one? Another what? A new client? New prank? Made no sense. Why would Mr. Chen pay her $500 to deliver such an enigmatic, almost nonsensical message? She reread it several times, trying to find some hidden meaning, but none emerged. It had to be some kind of elaborate joke, a bizarre test of her willingness to help, or perhaps even a prank on his friend. Disappointed and slightly annoyed by the whole peculiar incident, Li Wei crumpled the torn letter and tossed it into the recycling bin, dismissing it as a strange, isolated oddity. A few weeks later, Li Wei was curled up on her sofa, idly flipping through channels. The local news was on, a somber report playing in the background. Suddenly, a familiar image flashed across the screen, making her sit bolt upright. Hong Kong police dismantle major organ harvesting ring, the headline blared. The accompanying footage showed a police raid, and there it was, undeniably, chillingly, the familiar alleyway. The camera panned over the same dilapidated, supposedly vacant shops she had seen. Detectives in forensic suits swarmed the area, lights flashing, a stark contrast to the eerie silence she had experienced that night. A cold dread washed over Li Wei, replacing the comfortable warmth of her living room. The reporter detailed the gruesome findings: a sophisticated, highly organized criminal network operating out of seemingly abandoned storefronts, preying on unsuspecting individuals, luring them into their hidden clinics. The term, "another one," echoed in her mind, no longer a puzzling joke, but a horrifying revelation. The kind-eyed Mr. Chen, the 500 Hong Kong dollars, the important document, the deserted alleyway, the seemingly innocent request. It all clicked into place with a sickening thud. The letter wasn't a joke. It was a macabre tally, a confirmation, a terrifying notification of another victim delivered to the wolves. Li Wei felt a wave of nausea, her hands trembling. She had been so close, unknowingly an unwitting victim to something truly monstrous. The casual exchange on the MTR, the helpful gesture, had nearly entangled her in a web of unimaginable darkness. She stared at the television screen, her breath catching in her throat, a profound and horrifying realization sinking in. She had unknowingly held a piece of a monstrous puzzle, a silent messenger in a chilling game of life and death. The encounter, once a mere anecdote, was now a stark reminder of the hidden terrors that could lurk beneath the veneer of everyday life. The air in the small, stifling room on the 8th floor of the dilapidated apartment building in Kuala Lumpur hung heavy, a constant shroud of humidity and despair. 10-year-old Risky was a ghost within its confines, his existence a stark testament to the cruelty of his captors, his own parents. His once bright eyes were now sunken hollows in a skeletal face, a map of purple bruises and fading scars adorning his frail body. Food, when it came, was a meager scattering of stale leftovers, flung unceremoniously into his room, barely enough to keep the flickering flame of life within him. He was a prisoner in the sky, his world shrinking to the grimy window, overlooking a bustling city he could only dream of. One sweltering afternoon, a sweet, unfamiliar sound cut through the suffocating silence. A small, vibrant sunbird landed on his windowsill, its tiny head cocked, its bright eyes studying him with an unnerving curiosity. Loneliness, a constant companion, bubbled to the surface, and Risky, desperate for any connection, whispered to the creature. His voice, hoarse from disuse, was too loud, too sudden. The bird, startled, darted away, a flash of emerald and gold disappearing into the verdant canopy of a nearby rain tree. Days bled into weeks, each one a relentless cycle of hunger, pain, and isolation. But a new ritual began. Every morning, just as the first rays of the Malaysian sun pierced the dawn, the sunbird would return. It perched on the windowsill, its melodious chirps a gentle serenade, its gaze fixed on Risky. It was a tiny beacon of hope in his bleak existence, a promise that the world beyond his window still existed. He began to anticipate its arrival, a faint, fleeting smile touching his lips, the only true smile he had known in what felt like an eternity. As the weeks stretched into months, Risky's body waged a losing battle against severe malnutrition. He was a fragile stick figure, his bones jutting sharply beneath translucent skin. The bruises, constant reminders of his parents' rage, no longer healed, a testament to his body's failing defenses. Desperate, he'd meticulously scour the windowsill for tiny insects, ants, even the occasional brave spider, anything to stave off the gnawing hunger. In the humid Malaysian climate, insects were plentiful, yet they were a meager, unsatisfying feast. Then, a strange, miraculous thing began to happen. He started finding plump, segmented worms and small, juicy grubs on his windowsill. creatures that belonged on the damp earth below, not 8 stories up. A spark of understanding ignited within him. The bird. It had to be the bird. Every morning, just before dawn, it was leaving these offerings. It was the first act of unsolicited kindness, of unconditional love he had ever experienced. It was a lifeline, thrown by a creature with wings to a boy whose own wings had been clipped long ago. The abuse, however, continued its relentless assault. One particularly brutal night, a blow to his legs left him unable to walk properly, his already weakened limbs refusing to bear his weight. He lay crumpled on the floor, the pain a dull ache that had become as familiar as his own breath. That night, for the first time, the sunbird returned in the darkness. Its small form was a dark silhouette against the moonlit window. And then a sound that transcended the realm of his waking nightmares. "Why do you stay in your cage?" the bird chirped, its voice surprisingly clear, though tinged with an innocent curiosity. "Why don't you fly away?" Risky stared, his eyes wide, with a mixture of disbelief and wonder. A shadow against the moonlight, the bird seemed to shimmer. "What do you mean?" he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "The window is open," the bird replied, its head cocked. "There's nothing keeping you inside." "I can't fly," Rizky murmured, the words heavy with the lifetime of broken dreams. "I've seen humans flying in the skies," the bird chirped, its tone earnest. "I can teach you if you'd like, but we will have to wait until morning when the sun rises. Just follow my lead." With that, the bird took flight, disappearing into the velvety night. Risky, exhaustion finally claiming him, drifted into a fitful sleep, the bird's impossible words echoing in his mind. Dawn arrived, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The tiny sunbird landed on the windowsill, its chirps a sweet, insistent melody. Risky's eyes fluttered open. A smile, fragile but real, touched his lips. Painfully, he pushed himself up, dragging his weakened body towards the window. The bird, sensing his approach, hopped a little to the side, revealing a small, clear space on the sill. Risky saw it as a sign. With a surge of desperate hope, he clambered onto the precarious pile of accumulated trash in his room, using it to hoist himself onto the windowsill. The sunbird, startled by his sudden movement, took flight. Risky, his heart pounding a frantic drum against his ribs, took it as his cue. He looked at the vast expanse of the sky, at the rising sun, and for the first time, he felt no fear. He took a breath, a deep, shuddering inhale, and stepped off the windowsill, launching himself into the open air. He was finally free. The biting wind of a late December afternoon seemed to seep into Ryuta's bones, mirroring the gnawing boredom that had settled in. He and Nagisa, notorious for their thrill-seeking expeditions into forgotten corners and abandoned locales, found themselves utterly bereft of excitement. The usual haunts, crumbling shrines, overgrown farmhouses, had lost their allure. "There's this tunnel," Nagisa had mused earlier that day, his eyes glinting with an almost unsettling enthusiasm. "I saw a video online. Supposedly, it's haunted." Ryuta, ever the pragmatist despite his adventurous spirit, had been skeptical. But the alternative was another evening of video games and lukewarm tea. So, as the last rays of the sun bled across the winter sky, painting the distant Ikoma mountains in hues of bruised purple and orange, they pedaled their bicycles towards the rumored entrance of the tunnel. It was a secluded road, barely wide enough for a single car, twisting through a dense thicket of leafless trees. The air grew colder, the silence deeper, broken only by the crunch of their tires on the frozen gravel. They found it tucked away, almost swallowed by the encroaching shadows. a gaping maw of concrete leading into absolute darkness. Outside, a lone weathered vending machine stood like a forgotten sentinel, its single fluorescent light casting a sickly yellow glow on the surrounding gloom. It was the only beacon in the rapidly deepening twilight, a stark contrast to the oppressive blackness of the tunnel's interior. Well, this is atmospheric, Ryuta chuckled, a nervous edge to his voice. They propped their bikes against the base of the vending machine, the metal frames groaning softly in protest. Armed with their phone flashlights, they ventured inside. The air grew heavy, damp, and smelling of earth and decay. Their footsteps echoed unnervingly, magnified by the confined space. Other than the skittering of unseen creatures and the occasional drip of water from the ceiling, the tunnel was disappointingly mundane. No spectral figures, no disembodied whispers, just the cold, unyielding silence of abandoned concrete. They emerged minutes later, laughing at the anticlimax, the absurdity of the online ghost hunting video that had sent them on this wild goose chase. The freezing night air, now truly bitter, whipped around them. Hot drinks, then home, Nagisa suggested, his breath pluming in the frigid air. Sounds like a plan, Ryuta agreed, shivering. They walked towards the vending machine, its faint hum the only sound for miles around. Ryuta scanned the selection, a small smile playing on his lips. Score! One of those local gems, 60 and a pop. He began to fish around in his wallet for coins, the chill making his fingers clumsy. What do you want, Nagisa? Nagisa leaned in closer to peer at the selection, and in the dim light, he stumbled slightly, bumping into Ryuta. The contents of Ryuta's wallet scattered across the frozen ground, a handful of coins rolling with a faint clink, some disappearing into the narrow gap beneath the raised vending machine. Ah, crap. Sorry, man. Nagisa apologized profusely, already bending down. No worries, Ryuta replied, feigning annoyance. You'll just have to pay for the next round. He knelt down, his breath misting. The vending machine, he knew, was propped up on concrete blocks on either side to prevent floodwaters from reaching its electrical components, leaving a surprisingly large, dark void in the middle. He reached his hand into the cold, dusty space, his fingers probing for the errant coins. Instead of metal, he felt something coarse, like matted hair, and then a sickening, acrid stench filled his nostrils. Something undeniably organic and putrid. A jolt of unease shot through him. He instinctively recoiled, then, with a growing sense of dread, fumbled for the small, powerful flashlight in his back pocket. His heart hammered against his ribs as he clicked it on, aiming the beam into the murky depths beneath the machine. His world tilted. He froze, a guttural sound caught in his throat. At first, his mind struggled to process the image, to reconcile it with reality, but then the beam settled, illuminating a face, distorted, bruised, and caked in dried blood. And then he saw it clearly. The unmistakable, distinctive streaks of light brown hair that always fell across the forehead, and glinting faintly, the silver chain necklace Nagisa always wore, a small, intricate dragon charm dangling from it. It was Nagisa, his best friend, beaten, broken, and grotesquely contorted, stuffed into the narrow, dark confines beneath the vending machine in this desolate, forgotten place. Nagisa, Ryuta whispered, his voice a raw, desperate croak. Slowly, agonizingly, he turned his head to look at the person standing beside him, the one who had just apologized for bumping into him, the one who had just asked for a hot drink. But there was no one there. The only sounds were the persistent hum of the vending machine and the frantic thumping of his own heart. The bitter cold of the night air seemed to pierce him, but it was nothing compared to the icy grip of terror and disbelief that was seizing his soul. His mind reeled, threatening to plunge him into a bottomless chasm of madness. He scrambled to his feet, a strangled scream caught in his throat. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to escape this waking nightmare. He flung himself onto his bicycle, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it. He pedaled with a desperate, frantic energy he didn't know he possessed, a blur of terror propelling him down the dark, twisting road towards the distant, comforting glow of town lights. He didn't stop until he burst through the doors of the nearest police station, his story a jumbled, incoherent torrent of shock and grief. The officers, looking at his wild eyes and trembling frame, listened patiently, then gently urged him to go home, to try and rest. They assured him they would investigate, but their expressions held a mixture of concern and skepticism. That night, lying in his bed, the familiar warmth of his futon offered no solace. The image of Nagisa's face, bruised and lifeless beneath the vending machine, was seared into his eyelids. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, streamed down his face, blurring his vision. His phone, lying beside him on the tatami mat, suddenly lit up. A new message notification. He blinked through his tears, picking up the device with a trembling hand. The screen glowed in the darkness. Sagashi ni kite kurete arigato. Thank you for coming to find me. The afternoon sun, typically a welcome warmth on Lena's back, felt oddly oppressive as she knelt in her flower bed, trowel in hand. Her prize-winning roses were looking a bit peaky, and she suspected a nutrient deficiency. As she dug, turning over the rich, dark earth, her trowel struck something unyielding. Not a rock, though. This was smooth, rubbery, and strangely organic. She cleared away more soil, revealing a thick, dark purple strand, pulsing faintly as if with a sluggish heartbeat. It looked disturbingly like an engorged vein, snaking through the earth beneath her petunias. A shiver, unrelated to the cool breeze, traced its way up her spine. Curiosity, however, outweighed her unease. Following the grotesque vein, Lena dug, meticulously uncovering more of its twisted path. It led out of her flower bed, under the manicured lawn, and then, to her growing horror, beneath the old stone wall separating her cottage from Mrs. Hendricks's. Each exposed length of the pulsing growth seemed to throb with a more insistent rhythm. Panic began to bubble as she realized the vein wasn't just in her garden. It was a dark, subterranean network. With a growing sense of dread, she followed its tendrils, tracing them through the village of Odawater. Under the quaint cobblestone paths, beneath the ancient oak in the village square, even seemingly disappearing under the foundations of the tiny, charming houses. Every single building, every familiar landmark, seemed to be tethered to this insidious, pulsating growth. Driven by a desperate need to understand, Sarah followed the strongest, thickest strand as it burrowed deep into Fluisterwood, a place the villagers usually avoided after dusk due to the unsettling silence and the way the shadows seemed to stretch and writhe. The air grew heavy, thick with a scent she couldn't quite place, metallic, yet earthy and faintly sweet. Finally, in a hidden clearing, she found its source. It was a tree unlike any she had ever seen. Ancient and gnarled, its bark was a shimmering, almost obsidian black, shot through with veins that glowed with an eerie, phosphorescent purple light. The entire trunk pulsed, a slow, rhythmic beat that resonated deep in her bones. A low hum emanated from it, a sound that seemed to reverberate, not just in her ears, but within her very mind. It was magnificent, terrifying, and utterly alien. She ran back to the village, breath ragged, fear lending wings to her feet, bursting into the general store, where most of the villagers were gathered for their afternoon tea. She stammered out her discovery. her voice trembling. Skepticism warred with unease on their faces until she insisted they see it for themselves. Cautiously, led by the village elder, old Mr. Meyer, they followed Lena into the woods. The hushed gasps and widening eyes as they beheld the pulsing, glowing tree confirmed her horrifying discovery. A collective shiver ran through the group. It it feels wrong, whispered young Peters, usually the most boisterous among them. It's like it's sucking the life out of everything, added Mrs. Hendricks, clutching her shawl tighter. After a tense discussion and with the unsettling realization that this bizarre network was indeed connected to every single house, a grim consensus was reached. The tree had to go. It was an unknown, an unnatural presence, and its very existence felt like a threat to Odowater. Armed with axes, saws, and a heavy sense of foreboding, the villagers returned to the clearing. The air around the tree seemed to thicken, the low hum intensifying as they approached. Jacob, the strongest lumberjack among them, took the first swing. The axe bit into the glowing bark with a sickening thud, and a viscous, luminous purple sap oozed from the wound. Almost immediately, a wave of nausea swept through the crowd. Several villagers clutched their stomachs, their faces paling. A few stumbled, their movements becoming sluggish. The hum from the tree grew louder, a mournful, drawn-out wail. "Keep going," urged Mr. Meyer, his own face looking a little green, but his resolve unwavering. "We must!" The stronger ones, fueled by a desperate need to sever the connection, pushed on, their blows becoming more erratic as their strength waned. Each strike sent a fresh wave of illness through the remaining villagers. Their limbs felt heavy, their heads swam, and a profound weariness settled into their bones. Yet driven by a primal fear, they continued. Finally, with a guttural roar, Jacob delivered the last mighty blow. The axe cleaved through the last remaining fibers. With a deafening crack that echoed through the woods, the glowing, pulsating tree toppled. It hit the ground with a bone-jarring thud, the unholy glow extinguishing instantly. At that very instant, as if pulled by an invisible string, every single villager crumpled to the earth. Not with a cry, not with a gasp, but in a horrifying synchronized collapse. Their bodies lay scattered amongst the fallen leaves like discarded puppets, eyes wide open but glazed and vacant, reflecting only the dull gray sky. Amelia was camping in the woods when she heard it, a small voice tinged with genuine distress. Her spine tingled. No one else was supposed to be out here. Grabbing her headlamp and a sturdy walking stick, she cautiously moved towards the sound, pushing aside thick ferns and low-hanging branches. That's when she saw her. A tiny figure, no older than 6, stood trembling beside a moss-covered boulder. Her dress, a simple cotton sundress, was streaked with dirt and snagged in several places. Her fair hair, tied in uneven pigtails, was disheveled with twigs and leaves. Large, tear-filled blue eyes, framed by long lashes, stared up at Amelia, wide with a mixture of fear and nascent hope. "Oh, sweetheart," Amelia murmured, kneeling slowly, trying not to startle the child. Her voice was gentle, soothing. "Are you lost? What's your name?" The little girl sniffled, wiping a grubby hand across her wet cheeks. "My name is Millie," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Daddy brought me out here hunting. I saw a pretty flower, a really, really pretty purple one, and I wanted to pick it for Mommy. But when I looked up, Daddy wasn't there anymore." Fresh tears welled, spilling down her smudged face. As Millie spoke, Amelia felt a strange jolt. There was something undeniably familiar about the girl's delicate features, the shape of her eyes, even the slight tilt of her head. It was an unsettling echo of a memory she couldn't quite grasp, like a half-forgotten dream. She offered Millie a granola bar and a small bottle of water from her pack. "It's okay, sweetie. We'll find your daddy. Do you remember what he looks like? Or where he went?" Millie took a small bite of the bar, her trembling hands clutching it tightly. "He's big," she said simply between chews, "and he said we were playing a game, hide and seek, but he always comes back." Her innocent confidence was heartbreaking. Amelia tried to draw more information, her concern deepening with every vague answer. "Does your mommy know you're out here?" Millie shook her head, a faraway look in her eyes. "Mommy's sick. She's been sick for a long, long time. Daddy says she has to stay in her special room away from everyone so she doesn't get other people sick." She paused, then a bright, almost unsettlingly cheerful smile bloomed on her face. "But she tells me stories every night through the door. My favorite is the one about the Moon Princess. And sometimes she sings." Her smile faltered slightly. "But her voice sounds a little off sometimes, like when she has a cold." Amelia's stomach twisted. A special room. This wasn't the typical story of a sick parent. It sounded more like confinement. The sense of familiarity intensified, prickling at the back of her mind. Could it be? She dismissed the thought. It was too bizarre. "That's why I wanted to pick the pretty flower," Millie continued, oblivious to Amelia's growing unease. "Daddy said flowers make sick people feel better. I wanted to make Mommy feel all better so she could come out of her room." Then, with the guileless innocence of a child, Millie reached into the small, dirt-stained pocket of her sundress. She pulled out a folded, somewhat crinkled piece of paper. It was a photograph, old and faded at the edges, but undeniably clear. Amelia's breath hitched. It was a picture of a young woman, perhaps in her late 20s, smiling brightly at the camera. She looked strikingly like Millie, only older. The woman in the photo had the same distinct, heart-shaped face and kind eyes that Amelia had seen plastered on bulletin boards and lampposts across town nearly a decade ago. Janet Anderson. The name screamed in Amelia's mind, cold and sharp. Janet Anderson, the local artist, declared missing 8 years ago. Her disappearance had been a local sensation, a chilling mystery that had never been solved. A missing person poster with that exact face had haunted Amelia's peripheral vision for months after she moved to the area. 8 years. 8 years since Janet vanished. The pieces didn't just click, they slammed together with the force of a hammer blow. A cold dread spread through Amelia, numbing her limbs. This wasn't just a lost child. This was something far, far worse. The man Millie called Daddy wasn't a concerned parent. He had to be the one who took Janet. And here's a child birthed by a woman in a living nightmare. He must have groomed Millie from birth, kept her isolated, lied to her, perhaps even warped her perception of reality. "Millie," Amelia managed, her voice barely a whisper, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She forced herself to smile, to keep the fear from her eyes. "We need to get back to my camp, right now. It's getting dark, and we need to call for help." She gently but firmly took Millie's small hand, her mind racing. She had to get them both out of here. Fast. Her campsite was only a short distance, her car keys and phone inside her tent. Adrenaline coursed through her veins, a primal urge to flee. They hurried through the thickening twilight, the familiar sounds of the forest now replaced by an ominous silence that amplified the thud of her own fear-stricken heart. Every rustle of leaves, every snapped twig, sounded like footsteps behind them. Finally, the small green dome of her tent came into view. Relief, potent and fleeting, washed over Amelia. She fumbled with the zipper, her hands shaking, her eyes scanning the dimly lit clearing for any sign of movement. As she unzipped the tent flap, the canvas parted, and a face stared back at her from the shadowy interior. A man. He was tall, with a lean build and a surprisingly calm, almost serene expression on his face. His eyes, though, held an unnerving glint. He smiled then, a slow, predatory curving of his lips that sent a chill straight to Amelia's bones. "Good job, Princess," he said, his voice a low, smooth rumble directed at Millie. "Looks like we will be having a welcome party for our new mommy tonight." Millie beamed, skipping a step closer to the man, utterly unaware of the horror unfolding around her. Amelia froze, her hand still on the zipper, her blood turning to ice. The man's gaze shifted to her, his smile widening, revealing a flash of white teeth in the dim light. In his hand, almost casually, he held a length of rope. The woods, once her sanctuary, had become her trap.